once you know why you're doing something, then what are you doing about it, or what are you doing to solve it? And then how, meaning the specifics of how you're going to solve it too. So that even if you do go in a loop that doesn't take you to where you want it to be, meaning a feedback loop, as long as you can keep sight of that, why you were doing it in the first place, maybe you didn't get the results you wanted to, but at least you know how it plays in that bigger picture.
What's up, creative critters? It's your boy, Eugene Choi.
Hey everyone, it's Jonathan.
And it's Michael.
And this is the Pample Pod, the show with candid conversations and creative chaos. Today is Monday morning, January 20th, and we're going to jump right into this week's big question, which is, how does one position themselves towards sustainable success in entrepreneurship? For me, it's really coming down to, how do you know what you should be doing as an entrepreneur or as a startup before you even know why you're doing said thing in the first place? So kind of a direct question, but I'll open the floor for you two, and I'll try to jump in at any point.
Yeah, I think when it comes to sustainability, there's a few things that come to mind. One is sort of sustaining like the internal talent system that you have in your startup or within your company. So part of that is employee retention and really finding employees that align with the core values of the company. I think especially when you're on a small team, it's really important to have similar ideals and let those principles hold the team together, because it helps you find people who are really passionate about what you're working on. It helps you retain those people, and it helps those people know that the company is sort of in this together, that it's not you and the company, but rather you're all working as one. And that sense of camaraderie, I think, is really important to getting through some of the rough times that can come with running a startup.
Yeah, I like the take you had on that one, Jonathan, with both at the individual level and as the company level, and also kind of the sort of guiding principle you have for that. I think in my interpretation of your question, Eugene, it was maybe a little more, one step more abstracted and maybe a little more applicable to like a founding team, like is our case now, in terms of what do you need for that sustainability, although I pretty much agree with everything you just said. For me, things like you kind of need three key ingredients to be able to persevere through, especially as you're in the starting phase of a startup. And that would be the passion, purpose, and pragmatism. And the reason for that is that essentially the passion is going to be what gives you that grit to be able to push through. As we know, startups aren't easy. You always run into setbacks, or at least it's very likely. So to some extent, you do need to have some form of grit or passion to help you push through that. The purpose, and maybe it ties a little bit to I think what you were alluding to, Eugene, is that sort of acts as your guiding compass. Essentially, why are you doing things? So you not only need to have resolve, but you need to apply that resolve in a certain direction. And then the pragmatism is kind of goes into some of it, the skill building and the retention. But also I kind of think of it as like maximizing luck. I like to think of what you need to be successful in a startup as skills, grit, and luck, which I think that third aspect people usually don't like hearing because it's a little bit out of your control. But I think by being pragmatic, you can essentially increase the end number of odds that you run into something. And so being able to be pragmatic or smart about how you're tackling a problem, how many opportunities you give yourselves or you build for yourselves, or there's kind of an intent behind that, you're maybe more likely to overcome that luck factor. And so that's where I think there's a certain pragmatic, being visionary and having the compass is a good trait, but in itself, it's not, the one and only thing you need. I think you need that sort of mix of these three attributes, whether as a team or whether all three individuals have all three. I think you can mix and match. But I'd say at least for that sustainability in time, going very specifically from the startup phase, growing into something more sustainable, I think those are at least the attributes that would be useful.
There's a lot of threads to pull on what both you, Jonathan, and you, Michael, share here. And I just want to first poke at that one thing that you brought up, Michael, where it's like, being a company or a startup that lives long enough to be exposed to as many opportunities as you can, like financial or a collaboration or joint venture with someone else. There is a huge, and like you say, we as entrepreneurs and many others would like to think we hold fate in our own hands, that if we have an idea of a product or a problem that we really want to solve, if we believe in that so much, we can make it happen. But there is that luck that you mentioned. And unfortunately, that's just kind of out of our hands, where you have to be in the right place at the right time. But you also have to have enough time to work with so that you can have that, that perfect moment. that connects with what you brought up, Michael, where it's having that grit and having the right team that can really weather those storms, so to speak. That when you first come up with this idea of a company that you want to create, you want to really be picky with who you choose as those first 10 or 100 employees, because as we mentioned before, off mic, but it really, those first couple of people that join the team help foster that culture. But regardless of if you need someone that's super smart or super creative or super pragmatic and financially wise, you need someone with grit, especially in the first early stages, and especially if you're bootstrapped, where you're not just pulling money everywhere, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the impact on culture of the first few people you hire is extremely important. I mean, it really does shape the company as a whole and how you're going to choose to organize, operate, and really just it can make or break, or I guess reinforce, or whatever the other word I'm thinking is, your value system, essentially, right? If you bring people, and they don't necessarily need to be aligned in every single aspect and be in the exact same mold, but at least aligned to the core principles, right? I think there's richness and diversity of opinion and diversity of values, perhaps, but at least, your sort of first order principles, your core principles, you should be aligned there. If your first, like you said, 10 or 100 hires kind of go opposite that, or really just don't align, you're probably just going to end up being a very different company than when you initially set out to be. Whereas if they do align and, maybe they have second order differences or slight different takes on how they would tackle something, I think that can be enriching, because now it's going to still be aligned with what you want, but perhaps open your mind to different ways about getting there, because, we all have our own individual biases. And so being able to have sounding boards that can, I guess, not just reverberate whatever you told them, but also maybe, change the message a little bit, or open your eyes to different ways of communicating or different implementation methods, that can be very enriching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an important balance to strike, I think. Both getting people who have the same long-term goals and same principles and they have a similar purpose, perhaps, but different backgrounds and technical skills and experiences.
Yeah,
that's really important, I think.
And that on its own, hiring the right people on the team with enough grit, but it is trying to build like a diverse talent pool and like knowledge base, like you're saying, Jonathan, where you have people who are experts in one area and you have people who are experts in another thing, because then you could have this wide net of people generating ideas whenever you're trying to create something from scratch. Something I want to bring up now for us to kind of discuss is, as an entrepreneur for sustainable success, should you build a product, or should you see this as like, I want to build a product to solve a problem, or should I solve problems by building products? And it's about trying to emphasize what's important to you as an entrepreneur. And that's something I want to propose for us to think about.
I'd say from the perspective of kind of an engineer, I really think that I work best on products that I'm passionate about, or if I care deeply about the problem and I really want to solve it. I think that there are cases and there is value into sometimes producing a product, at least from a personal standpoint, even if it doesn't have a customer, as like a hobby, not as a business necessarily, because when you're producing a product, you can of course refine like your technical skills, like your workflows. It can be very enriching just to create something that you care about. But from a business perspective, you need customers to finance what you're producing. So whatever you're creating, if it's going to be for a business, you really have to be in tune with what your people want and kind of who the product is serving. Like the end customer needs to be at the forefront of your mind. And it should inform all of your requirements and all of your designs. And it should be very narrowly tailored, I think, as much as it can be to serve those needs. So I think, honestly, beginning with a problem, then producing a product is probably the best move business-wise. But there's still something very enriching about coming up with products or doing projects as a hobby, even if they don't necessarily have a client base.
I really love that response from you, Jonathan, because I honestly, up to this point, didn't think about this in the way you presented, where you could think about this as a hobby versus a venture as a company, where I could just do something for fun. Like nothing stopping me from just buying a couple of raspberries and creating my own DIY project, my own my own plant watering filtration system or something. So there could be a time and place where maybe I just have an idea, I want to build something and just go with that because I just want to develop a technical skill.
Yeah. From the business perspective, at least, I'm definitely team understand the problem deeply first, and then, sort of create whatever product or service it may be to answer that problem specifically that you've set out to be or to solve. Now, I think there is value, in sort of hobbies, and in a way, I would argue, and maybe saying that it's a problem is too strong of a word, but like in a way, you're solving the problem of enhancing your skill set or personal development by going through hobbies. But from as a big fan of algorithms that love the whole exploration versus exploitation trade-off, I think the hobby in that sort of search is part of that exploration, right? Sometimes you got to have fun with it, right? It's like any sports you take or anything you do, whether technical or not, there's some times where it's appropriate to learn, follow different protocols, learn different techniques, and sometimes just kind of have fun and mess with it, so to speak, so that you get to learn different things as well. There's definitely, at least as part of the learning cycle, merit to doing it that way. But then for the commercialization part, I think really setting out to understand a problem, just fundamentally what people are facing and creating a solution around that with that in mind. To me, that's what allows you to achieve simplicity in design. And what I mean by that, because it's kind of a nebulous concept, is essentially, bridging that gap as simply between the problem that someone is facing and the solution that you're offering, right? Where whatever you are offering in your design accomplishes that goal and only that goal, with nothing that's superfluous, extraneous, that really is not needed in order to solve that problem. But that does require a deep understanding of that problem. Otherwise, I kind of agree with you, Eugene. It's very easy to kind of have that product obsession where you end up falling in love with the product or your service you're designing, and maybe losing a little bit sight of who you're helping or who you're doing this for, or what you're doing exactly for them. So I think being able to have that understanding kind of helps keep you on track and shooting for that simplicity in design by understanding that problem is pretty key to having a product. Now, that can be intimidating initially because, right, it's kind of like a big step function. So I'm a firm believer that to sort of bridging the path of me between, starting point, understanding the problem, and having that final simple product, I'm a big fan of modular and scalable solutions, because that kind of allows you to iterate and, start somewhere small. A lot of people will call that the minimum viable product or MVP. But essentially, set off on the right direction, start with what you can do, and then build on that. Because most likely, like most things engineering, especially, you're iterating and then you realize that things aren't quite exactly this way and you need to change your course a little bit. I think all of that is normal. It's, again, part of that learning process. In this case, learning the problem, or maybe learning something about technical limitations in whatever product you're making. But shooting for modular and scalable solutions allows you to at least break down that problem into bite-sized pieces where you can go more progressively, so it's not as daunting as going from zero to the ultimate solution, only to realize you didn't quite capture what the problem was because you didn't really have that feedback loop along the way. When you do things in these increments, you have that chance to kind of close that feedback loop and make sure that your understanding of the problem is what it should be, because sometimes we set out to solve problems that are not ours, and so maybe we don't quite understand them as well as we think we do.
Everything that you mentioned up to this point, it's very convenient that a lot of those points you shared do kind of work well with each other, such as the whole idea with the modular scalable solutions. You're going to go through multiple iterations, and planning the whole development process from ground zero does require a lot of foresight, so that you don't have to rehash a lot of work that may unfortunately be wasted throughout that development timeline. But as you say, hopefully as a company, to drive sustainable success, you develop modular scalable solutions that encourage hopefully tight and reinforced feedback loops, so that you are learning throughout the process. Because as you say, when you first spoke, Michael, you're going to learn inevitably. Even if you are a subject matter expert in the field where you want to build a product in, you're still going to learn a lot. And building these modular scalable solutions, you're going to be able to learn about what works, what doesn't. So, there is that stigma where people say, oh, failure is bad, or there's just that negative public stigma where if something doesn't work out, then for some reason that's like the end all be all. But really, I really hope there at some point there was like a cultural revolution, so to speak, quote unquote, where we do kind of undo that mental psychological training where failure is not it's not the end. It's really just part of the learning process. So some people on social media would be like, oh, one of the things you could do as a person for personal growth would be to fail forward, where sure, you're going to make mistakes on the way, but how do you move on from that? How do you learn from this so that you don't repeat the same mistakes over and over again? So the more times you run through these feedback loops, the more times you iterate, kind of like how a lot of SpaceX or Tesla, they constantly are testing things. So then you know so they know what works and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So then by the end of it all, you end up with a product that is really fine tuned and you know the system so well, and you're just light years ahead from the competition as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think what you're saying makes me think of like when I usually get on my soapbox and talk about why, what, and how too. I really do think to be able to have that environment where you can, I guess, fail successfully in the sense you're learning something and able to close that feedback loop, or even to be able to go through the feedback loops, you really need to start with why you're doing something. And I know it sounds simple, but really you're going to be deriving all your alignments, essentially, all your processes, how you do things from that why. It's only then that you should get into, once you know why you're doing something, then what are you doing about it, or what are you doing to solve it? And then how, meaning the specifics of how you're going to solve it too. So that even if you do go in a loop that doesn't take you to where you want it to be, meaning a feedback loop, as long as you can keep sight of that why you were doing it in the first place, maybe you didn't get the results you wanted to, but at least you know how it plays in that bigger picture. I think that kind of saves you from over pivoting as a company or chasing trends blindly, because you do have that sort of guiding principle that pushes your technical direction, your moral direction, your business direction as well. So to me, it's kind of a simple mantra, if you will, I guess, of why, what, how, but that is that sort of pecking order that I like to follow for myself. Because even, deriving requirements, what are the right requirements? In order to answer that question, a lot of engineers typically, or scientists, are going to go straight into how you're doing something and look at a more granular level. But sometimes when you do that, you lose track of, is the requirement you're putting down on paper even required in the first place? Is it actually even aligned with why you're doing this, meaning the problem or the solution you're trying to go after? So I think kind of putting that in that order, going from sort of bigger picture to more granular, and sort of to keep looping on that picture. It's not just a one-time exercise and then you're done. You kind of keep cycling through that over and over. To me, that's one way you can create that environment where it's okay to fail, because as long as you can keep track of the direction you're going in, you can assess that failure and look at, okay, did we learn something, right? Like maybe it didn't go directly for that product, but is there a parallel path that the company is interested in pursuing for which that, you learned something that might be helpful either in a parallel product, or maybe you learned that it's not helpful at all. And that's okay too, right? Sometimes there's a no-win situation where it wasn't the right track, but at least if you have that ability to know why you're doing something, to look at that feedback loop and say, okay, this wasn't the right thing for us. It was the wrong direction. We're going to cut it loose. And you're kind of avoiding the sunk cost fallacy of, oh no, we've already invested time and money in this development or R&D project or whatever it may be. And so we're going to keep pushing on it, right? So I do think for whether knowing when to cut bait, or whether maybe even doubling down and saying, okay, this wasn't exactly the results we expected, but if we modify the experiment, we can modify XYZ product to actually solve a tangential problem that we realize is there. You can kind of use that as your guiding compass for that.
So everything that you shared just right now, Michael, that is great knowledge to have as someone sitting here and hopefully as a listener. And you kind of answered a question that I wanted to ask earlier, which was, is everything that your product and system performing on the back end and everything that you're offering to a customer on the front end, is that necessary? And how do you know what is necessary for a system to begin with? And so that was kind of a question that you kind of implicitly answered, where you really sit down at square one, where you're understanding why you're doing things in the first place. And it kind of ties back to that original thing you were pushing for, Michael, whereas you understand the problem that you're solving before you go and build the product. Otherwise, it feels very lopsided. You're building a product that you romanticize so much, where now you're trying to justify the product after the fact, where it just wouldn't work that way, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you were about to jump in.
Yeah,
Jonathan.
Something I think worth noting about that kind of lopsided way of looking at problems, where you put the product first and then you go searching for a problem to solve, is that oftentimes people, they think back on their previous experience and they go, well, what have I worked on in the past? Or like, what's my area of expertise? So it makes it really easy to kind of put yourself in the mental framework of like, oh, I work on structures, or I'm really good at 3D printing. So we should 3D print something and then use it to solve a problem. It's especially easy to get into that way of thinking, kind of because of the way that we specialize, and you have to specialize to a degree in order to be good at something. But it's just a potential pitfall that I know engineers can kind of easily fall into because of the nature of our work.
I would agree with that too. It's very, like you said, easy to say, oh, in this past project, this is how we tackled it, so we're going to tackle it again this way. And to me, just to go back on that soapbox for maybe another 2 seconds, that's if you have the why clearly in your mind, you can ask yourself, pause and wonder if that technique is the appropriate one for that new project. Because if you pause and ponder that why, you might realize there's a different context to what you're doing. And maybe then it helps realize that the technique or the approach that you implement shouldn't be whatever you just did in the past, because maybe it serves a different purpose, or it's not appropriate for whatever method you're trying to implement. But if you can, if you can understand that, I think it kind of helps avoid that pitfall. But kind of tying into what you were saying, Eugene, with sort of looking at products and I guess adding functionalities, and I think there is that pitfall sometimes of also wanting to just add features because you're maybe so excited to just solve the problem, you want to keep adding things. And then it does raise that question of necessity in the functions you're adding.
Yeah, feature creep.
Yeah, exactly. Like kind of scope creep or feature creep. And I think it's not just about adding functionality, but it's really looking at what value you're adding without adding complexity to the system you're building. So for me, that necessity is going to be somewhere at the intersection of simplicity, impact, and scalability. Simplicity because it helps with adoption, simply put, right? If you have something that's just overwhelming to learn, it does minimize your ability to adopt whatever, system, product, protocol you're trying to sell. The impact because obviously if you have a problem, the solution you bring to it has to be impactful, like actually solve the problem. So that's, I guess, what I mean by that. And then scalability, either in the number of people you're able to help with that problem, right? Scalability can come in many forms, right? But you can have either very expensive products that you can only sell to a fraction of people because they're just not widely available, or maybe from a resource perspective, it's just too hard to build many of XYZ items you're building. So to me, the better businesses have something that they're able to scale. And I know it sounds simple, but it's a very easy pitfall to fall in to just add functionality without kind of looking back at what is for each function you add, what is that impact, that you've modified? Have you increased it for the better? Have you taken away from something else? Have you made the system harder to understand? And so while you have added some kind of functionality, now a lot of people just can't find it, or they've missed other functionalities because now the system is too complex. And have you affected your scalability? Could you have helped more people had you not added that function and it had been less costly to roll out? Those are all things to trade off and evaluate, and at least those trade-offs are what make me a big fan of that simplicity in design, and tending to go for understanding the problem and really shooting for what are the functions that solve that problem and not adding anything more to that than is necessary.
Right on. So before we wrap up the segment, I wanted to just quickly review the key points and see if anyone else had anything to add. So to be able to position oneself as a company or as an entrepreneur towards sustainable success, you probably want to first build the right team from the get-go. The first 10 or 100 employees, they gotta have the grit, and then maybe they should have a diverse knowledge base. And then you also want to be able to identify problems before you run off with products, understand the why before what you're going to do and how you're going to implement that. All that to be able to implement and roll out simple, scalable solutions like you mentioned, Michael. I was wondering, so overall, those points, was there anything else anyone else wanted to add before we move on?
That's a really good recap. I feel complete.
My brain is burning up right now trying to condense everything.
That was good. Yeah, no, I think you've hit all the key points really, I think.
Well, on that note, let's jump right into our second segment, Thanks Mom, where we asked ChatGPT to give us 2 ideas to ideate around, and with the goal of creatively exploring business cases. So on that note, let's talk to Mom, get some good quality time with her, and let's see what she gives us.
I'm always a little scared before these come out.
Don't know what's going to happen.
It's a coin flip. You have no idea what to expect. And on that note, this one's going to be really interesting. Echo ladder.
Echo ladder.
Echo ladder.
Bats immediately. Just, I feel like I'd like the audience to know these are genuinely like on the spot prompts.
Yeah, like,
right.
You have no clue what it's going to say at a time.
This is the first time in my life that I've seen those 2 words
so,
matched
clarify,
together.
Echo, as in the sound phenomena,
echo.
and then ladder, as in the scaling device.
Right, exactly.
Fair.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like this is harder than the previous 2 episodes. Listen to that, listeners, if you haven't checked it out yet. which was Pixel Hammock Thunder Stapler.
Good plug. Let's see. No, I'm like seriously, just echolocation comes to mind. I wonder if I don't know. There's a particular use case for ladders. I mean, certainly for finding things.
I mean, how often do you use a ladder? I mean, and a ladder has only one purpose. It's just to climb things. So I'm wondering, how do you use?
No, it has one purpose, but it can solve many problems.
That's true.
I'm thinking right now. So I love that you brought up the whole echolocation thing. I think that's what it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. But ladder, you can change your altitude where you are, albeit very minimally. You're going from one height to another. But what I'm thinking about this is underwater, like sonar mapping, maybe, where the ocean is deep and with varying depths. You could have like, I forget what the zones are. You have like sunlight zone, twilight zone, other things like that. But I wonder if there is some sort of, let's imagine that we are the next Ocean X or something, some submarine diving company or whatever. Maybe as a company, you provide services where you have really powerful acoustic sensors, echolocation, where you can map varying terrain. I forget what the word is for like generating the like elevation. Topography, that's what it was. Yeah, thank you. So you have a service where you have really powerful sensors where you can map the topography of varying ocean depths, which is something that we do need as a species. Not most of the ocean is not mapped out very well, only certain like patches and stretches. But the latter thing kind of just alluding to the varying depths of the ocean. You could have the Mariana Trench. You could have something as shallow as a beach, a coastline. So that's where I'm thinking of. I don't know what do you guys think about that, or different idea.
No, I think my only reluctance for powerful sonars would be impact on marine life potentially.
Oh, that's a good point, actually. Yeah.
Not to put in some moral considerations in there, but it's a part of the ideation process, I guess.
Unless you lean into that and use it to try to kill off invasive species in an area,
or scare them off using sound.
Actually, I wonder if you could. Like say lionfish, for example, trying to think of an invasive maritime species. Like
figure out the resonance frequency of their bones,
or one they react. Oh man, one shade less dark of what they react adversely to. But scare them off, or just
that would interfere.
I love that. Yeah.
That would scare them, I think.
Yeah, that'd actually be an interesting use case for on the business case. I don't know if private companies will look at, maybe it's more of a NOAA or the marine protected areas that would be interested. But at least from a doing good in the world perspective, I really like that idea of, if there was a, frequency that say, I don't know, other mammals don't react to, but the lionfish does. That could be an interesting discovery right there.
I was going to just add on, I wonder if you can do it with like sea urchins as well. That's something we talked about.
Purple sea urchins. Yeah. They tend to latch on. They displace kelp, which is important for the marine ecosystem. So that'd be another interesting application.
If you can't eat them, just blast them. Just get rid of them.
Well, that's not too far removed from what people actually do, which is they distinguish red versus purple, and they usually send a dive team in, and just with little hammers, they'll kind of count the density of purple sea urchins in an area, and then they literally just hammer them until they've hit their quotas. Pretty old school. So I'm sure the Echo ladder would certainly make things a little easier. In that realm.
Taking ladder in a different direction, still thinking about still the vertical direction, actually, as most ladders tend to go. You could maybe think of some sort of acoustic-based propulsion system, or I'm certain that something like this probably exists because you're sending pressure waves to the air. You could probably lift like a paper airplane or something more heavy than that. But I wonder what you could accomplish if you're thinking about acoustic propulsion.
Or acoustic cannons too, where the range not super far ranging, but that could be an interesting maybe countermeasure for I don't know whether it's drones or maybe in other invasive species too. That could be kind of interesting. I was going to take ladder in the opposite direction of meaning down, thinking ground penetrating radars, which already exists. I don't know if there's anything new there necessarily, but kind of definitely using that to get subterranean information.
Unless there's like acoustic mining, is that a thing? I feel like we've talked about that on the previous episode.
Well, at least you can use the I guess the response from a ground penetrating radar to find either different material types or things like pyroducts. We were pretty interested in that while I was at Ames, looking into could you map pyroducts on Mars, for example, from the consideration that pyroducts are sort of a natural shelter. You could go in rather than build an entire base. The idea would be you can go into those pyre ducts, and if there is ice, most likely you would find them in those locations, which would provide a nice buffer from temperature fluctuations as well as radiation fluctuations. So we had this whole concept for formation flight, essentially doing ground penetrating radar. The issue is that it's a data hog, so that you need to, unfortunately process that on the spot and bring it back. So that's kind of a, constraint there. So I don't know if our echo lather could be somehow more efficient in that data processing. Maybe the lather part is solving the problem in increments or something like that.
As much as I respectfully enjoy Michael's idea, I want to look at the acoustic propulsion.
Yeah,
just a second more. That just sounds so interesting, and I wonder if the physics supports that. I wonder.
Yeah, what I had in mind as something that could potentially work out is you have some sort of very small machine, but the propulsion isn't actually mounted on it. Rather, you have your propulsion system. Like, let's say you want not sure why you would want this, but say a small paper airplane to go in a circle around a room. If you had acoustic cannons positioned around the room, you could potentially redirect it or propel it upwards. But I don't exactly see how that would be useful immediately. But it occurs to something that might be possible.
You're gonna have to use a lot of energy to somehow push something.
Yeah.
I wonder how efficient it really ends up becoming. Probably, albeit nowhere close to chemical propulsion for sure. But I wonder.
I'm wondering if the definition of acoustic could include detonation. If not, because that could open a whole other can of worms. I mean, you got rotating detonation engines, and then
pulse detonation engines.
Pulse detonation comes to mind with the huge shock absorbers they had for that. You were going to jump in, Jonathan, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, taking the echo part more metaphorically and the latter part more literally, what you could do is an echo is essentially a diminished version of an original sound. So what you could have is, let's say you have a ladder positioned in somewhat of an awkward place, it's difficult to climb onto. You could get a smaller echo ladder that mounts onto the side of your ladder and allows you to climb up at a right angle.
Modular ladders.
Yeah, because I've used ladders and stuff in places where it's, you have to come at it from the side and you have to climb onto it from an angle.
When you started
you can make them safer by having a side mounted right angle ladder.
Initially, I thought you were going to go for Russian doll nested ladders. I thought this was where this was going.
Yeah, you could do that, I suppose.
Yeah, but there could be, if you have sometimes complex shapes you need to climb. So actually being able to take a right angle.
That are very tall. Server rooms are like that sometimes.
Yeah. Actually, for mapping tight spaces, I wonder if you could have maybe going the other way of literal on the echo, metaphorical on the ladder, which I'm not too sure if the ladder is pretty... I'm just thinking if you need to do work on an engine or a car engine, for example, it could be a rocket engine too, or somewhere that's heavily instrumented, for example, if you're building a prototype, having almost those sounding probes you can have. Usually they're video and light, but having it be able to do a 3D map for you, basically being able to 3D map really tight spaces. I forget the name of that device, not a periscope, but endoscope. Essentially that can do, via sound, just map out whatever area it is. So if you have wear and tear or some other damages, you can maybe snake that thing around and being able to assess a situation, did a screw fall off, for example, you can no longer see it on the map. That could be kind of an interesting, I see more of the business case for that in using the echo. I'm not sure how the lather fits into that, but I could at least see that kind of direction. Now I'm almost wondering, thinking of cleaning pipes, I guess, just like you have sonicators in a chemistry lab, if you can just have essentially a sonicator go through a pipe so that you're not putting Drano down the pipes necessarily, or things, products that are more chemicals that eventually come back to the environment or treatment facilities. I wonder if you could just sonicate different particulates on that, in a pipe. Essentially a pipe cleaner, but a little more eco-friendly, at least from the chemical side of things. We've strayed from the ladder, but I feel like at least we got the echo part.
Yeah, it's getting both components is the tricky part.
Yeah. I mean, there's only so many things you can do with a ladder. I feel like that's kind of...
Oh, you can use it to scale gaps, potentially.
I mean, like a bridge, sure, probably.
Yeah. I mean, there's a large handful, I would say, of things you can do with a ladder, but they're all done routinely.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, maybe they're little tiny metaphorical ladders to bridge the cracks that we found in the pipes.
Yeah. Unless anyone else had anything to share, I think on that note, we could wrap up this segment. If anyone listening in had any ideas that they wanted to share regarding an echo ladder, we would love to hear that. I personally would love to hear that. I'm sure everyone else would. But it was a challenging idea for sure that Mom threw out as a curveball, so to speak. So share your ideas in the comments if you would have taken this Thanks Mom segment a completely different way. Or you have any comments that you want to share about the big question, how does one drive a company towards sustainable success? So we look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.